An old woman arrives in an unknown town with a one-way ticket. She's met with loneliness, rejected because of her pride. But in the light of a cabin, her life changes forever. The roof of the bus stop was heavy with rainwater, and the drops leaking through the cracks in the ground sounded like a broken melody. Nora Berger sat there in her white wedding dress, completely soaked. The flowers in her hair had wilted, and her makeup had run down beneath her eyes. But her real wound was the empty ring box in her hand. She was curled up tightly over her bag, as if she didn't want to hear the outside world at all. Her eyes stared off into the distance, as if she were trying to go back a few hours and change what happened. But time, especially for a woman with a broken heart, was a ruthless teacher. That morning, she hadn't really dressed up to go to the wedding hall, but to run away. Her fiancé, Daniel, was obsessed with perfection. He cared more about appearances than real love. But neither her mother's antique veil nor the trembling hope in Nora's heart could change the fact that Daniel's family didn't think she looked young and impressive enough. Minutes before the wedding, Daniel had let go of her hand and walked away. "This isn't the right time for me," he'd said. Then he left without even a second glance. And now, here Nora was, left like a broken dream at the bus stop. The rain seemed to be crying with her. People walking by only glanced at her for a second before turning their heads away. Nobody stopped to ask, "Are you okay?" Because nobody wants to hear the scream of a shattered heart. But one person did stop. A man whose black t-shirt had darkened with rain, whose hands were stained with motor oil. He looked about 40, with a face marked by both exhaustion and curiosity. His name was Elias. Quietly, he crouched down to meet Nora's eyes. "Can I call someone for you?" he asked, his voice carrying no judgment, only genuine concern. Nora slowly raised her head. What she saw in his eyes wasn't pity. It was a loneliness she recognized in herself. A silent solidarity. "There's no one left," Nora said. Her voice cracked, but in her eyes was no anger, just a fragile acceptance. Elias paused for a few seconds, then took off his jacket and put it around Nora's shoulders. "Well, then I can't leave you out here in the rain," he said. "Not love, not romance, not big words. Just the simple kindness of one human being toward another who's been knocked down." Nora almost protested, but her wedding dress, soaked and muddy up to the knees, her cold and tired skin, and her weary heart wouldn't let her. She followed Elias toward an old pickup truck. The truck was just like Elias, worn but dependable. In the silence under the rain, the engine rumbled to life. They didn't talk on the way. It was like there was nothing to say, or maybe everything to say. Each silence was like an unspoken question. Why are you alone? Why is no one by your side? Where will you go? Elias took Nora to the little cabin behind his repair shop. Inside, there was just one wood stove, but the warmth carried a peace Nora hadn't felt in a long time. He handed her a towel to dry off and quietly warmed up some soup. He didn't ask her name or what had happened. For the first time, Nora could breathe beside a stranger without having to explain anything. But in the middle of this quiet, there was an echo of Elias's own past inside him. He too had once left someone right on that doorstep. And now, years later, life had brought someone else to him. Maybe this time, he could save not just a woman but his own conscience as well. And outside, the rain still hadn't stopped. But inside, something was slowly warming up. And there was one thing Nora hadn't noticed. That morning, she hadn't taken off her wedding dress. She hadn't taken off her hope, either. When the first light of morning slipped through the small window of the cabin, Nora forgot where she was for a moment. As her eyes traced the cracks in the ceiling, she could feel the streaks left by dried tears on her cheeks. The blanket over her was thin, but it was warm enough. The faint scent of the room metal, ashes, and pine reminded her of her childhood, of the last time she ever felt safe. She was pulled from her thoughts by the sound of a pot in the kitchen. Elias was awake. He was still wearing yesterday's clothes, but there was a kind of renewal in his eyes. "I'm making coffee," he said, his voice low but clear. "If you'd like some." Nora nodded. She didn't have the strength to talk yet. She got up. Her wedding dress was still on. It was dry now, but felt even heavier. She headed for the bathroom to take it off, but paused on the threshold. She saw herself in the mirror, her makeup gone, her face pale, but her gaze steadier than before. It was as if all that heartbreak had given birth to another woman inside her, a quieter but stronger woman. A few minutes later, Nora came into the kitchen in a plain sweater and an old pair of sweatpants Elias had given her. The wedding dress now hung on a hook in the bathroom. She'd taken it off, but hadn't abandoned it. Because Nora had worn that dress not just for a man, but for a dream. And that dream wasn't completely dead yet. She sat across from Elias at the small kitchen table. He slid one of the mugs toward her. "There's no milk in it." "Hope that's okay." Nora managed a slight smile. "Today, nothing is a problem." After the first sip, silence settled between them. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It was as if words had been put on hold, waiting to be called only if needed. "You didn't say anything last night," Elias said eventually, his eyes still on his mug. "Sometimes it's safer not to," Nora replied. Then she paused. "But with you, I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired of staying silent." And she began to talk. About Daniel, about his family, about the relatives who smiled to her face but looked down on her behind her back. About the moment she realized how alone she really was, even when she thought she was lucky. "It was supposed to be my wedding day. But for me, it felt like a funeral. I buried my own self-respect there." Elias just listened. He didn't interrupt or comment. Maybe he was the first man who had ever truly listened to her. And that silence gave Nora more peace than any explanation ever had. "And what about you?" Nora asked when she was done. Elias shrugged. "My story's quieter. I gave years to the repair shop. Once, I loved a woman. She chose someone else. After that, I just focused on fixing things. But some things you can't repair. Some breaks are like factory defects." "Why did you take me in?" Nora asked softly. Elias looked at her. "Because someone once did the same for me, and I was too late for them. I didn't want to be too late for you." In that moment, they looked each other in the eye. There was no love in that look, no promises. Just a shared weariness and a hope that still survived despite everything. And that hope was more valuable than anything else. Outside, the sun was starting to break through the clouds. But inside, the mood was still heavy. Because they both knew. Men like Daniel either come back full of regret, or they send rumors behind your back. And Elias still had some unfinished business in his quiet past. Plus, Nora hadn't been the only storm to enter the cabin last night. Just then, there was a light knock at the front door. Not once, but twice. Then silence. Elias stood up. Nora's eyes locked on the door. Elias reached into the cabinet beside the door, took out a small key, and opened a drawer. He pulled out a rusty handgun. "No one just knocks on the door here," he said quietly. "Be ready." Nora nodded. She would never turn her back on anyone again. Not on Elias and not on her own scars. The silence behind the door felt like it had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. As Elias tucked the gun into his belt, he motioned to Nora to step back. She did so without a word, but she never took her eyes off the door. They both felt the same thing. Whoever was coming wasn't just a person, but a piece of the past, a reckoning, maybe an unexpected storm. Elias took a deep breath, turned the lock, and slowly opened the door. Standing on the threshold was a man in his middle age, slim, but with sharp eyes. His clothes were covered in dust. He glanced inside. "Hey, Elias," he said. His voice was deep, but there was an undercurrent of unease. "Marcus," Elias replied, his lips tight. "It's been years since you've spoken my name." Nora noticed how Elias's body tensed at the sound of the name. This man wasn't a random visitor. He was a piece of Elias's past, maybe even a dark one. Marcus took a step in, but Elias's body was blocking the doorway like a wall. "I just came to talk," Marcus said. "I don't want anything. But I heard the news." "What news?" Elias's voice was icy. "The woman," Marcus said, nodding toward the inside. "Everyone in town's talking. The bride left behind. And you took her into your cabin. They say old Elias still can't stop playing the hero." Nora's heart clenched. Once again, her life was on someone else's lips. Once again, it was being told without her telling it. But this time was different this time. There was someone who would stand up for her against those who judged without listening. Elias narrowed his eyes. "You come here just to gossip? Or do you have another reason?" Marcus stepped back, reached into his coat pocket. Nora's heart nearly stopped. But the man only pulled out a crumpled letter. "I'm late, I know," he said. "But this, it's Lisa's last wish. She wanted you to have it before she died." Lisa. The name echoed in the air. Nora saw Elias tense up, saw his breath catch. "Why now?" Elias asked. "Why show up after all these years, when I thought it was all over?" Marcus looked away. Because when her life ended, your story was still unfinished. And to delay a dying woman's last wish, it's like letting her die all over again. Elias took the letter but didn't open it. His eyes were still locked on Marcus. If you're leaving, go now. There's a new life starting here. I don't have time for the past. Marcus nodded. You're lucky if your past has let you go, he said. Mine wakes me up every morning. Then he turned and walked away, as quietly as he'd come. Elias closed the door, locked it again, but his hands were still trembling. As he looked at the letter, it was as if he was holding a whole other life in his hands. Nora slowly came closer. Was that Lisa? The woman you talked about? Elias nodded. Yeah, because of her. I haven't let anyone get close for years. But you're different. He folded the letter and placed it on the table, not opening it. Not tonight, he said. Sometimes, some doors are better left rusty. When you open them, all that comes out is smoke. Nora was quiet for a while. Then she poured him another cup of coffee. Well, now you've got someone to sit and watch that smoke with, she said softly. If you want. They locked eyes. This time, the silence between them felt like a vow. The quiet agreement of two people carrying the same burden and deciding to walk in the same direction. Outside, the wind had changed. Maybe another storm wasn't coming. But the dust of the past was still hanging in the air. And for the first time, Elias felt ready to walk through that dust with someone by his side. Elias had woken up early. Not wanting to wake Nora, he quietly lit the stove, put the coffee on, and stepped outside the cabin. The sun hadn't risen yet, but there was a faint pinkish gray glow on the horizon. He nudged the damp earth with the toe of his shoe. It had rained overnight. The silence was broken only by the first chirping birds. But Elias's mind was anything but quiet. The letter on the table was still unopened. Lisa's name had thrown him back into the past. But Nora's presence, her sitting beside him in silence, asking nothing, judging nothing, could change the verdict of that past. For the first time, someone was standing by Elias without reminding him of his history. If that wasn't a miracle, what was? Inside, Nora had woken up and was quietly preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Her wedding dress was set aside now, but she was still in the center of the story. When Elias came in, a simple breakfast of eggs and stale bread was ready on the table. Nora's hair was messy, but there was a calm on her face that hadn't broken all morning. We need to go out today, Elias said. Nora looked up. Where? To town. I need to pick up some supplies. And you'll need to face some things. The town is talking. Either you stay silent, or you silence them with your voice. Fear flickered in Nora's eyes at first. Then she slowly nodded. Let's go. I don't want to hide anymore. The town was busier than ever that day. The market was set up. People were shopping, but their eyes kept drifting to Nora. Even though she wasn't wearing the weight of her wedding dress, the weight of their stares still pressed on her shoulders. As she walked beside Elias, a group of women approached. They were of all ages. Some were young, some closer to Nora's age. One of them stepped forward. Her face carried the exhaustion of years and the determination of a woman who had fought her battles. You're Nora, right? The woman asked. Nora stopped. Yes. The woman reached out her hand. I'm Helena. The man who left you at the altar. He tried to shame me, too, once. But I didn't stay silent. Nora held her breath. The woman went on. This town pushes out strong women at first, then envies them. But if you stand tall long enough, eventually they'll bow to you. We call ourselves the Forgotten Women's Club. If you want, welcome to the club. The women behind her smiled. Some held sewing baskets, some vegetables from the market, but all seemed to rest an invisible hand on Nora's shoulder. This support gave a new meaning to the resistance that had begun with standing beside Elias. Nora's voice trembled. Thank you. I don't know if I'll stay in this town. Helena nodded. Stay or go, but never go anywhere with your head bowed. In that moment, a light spread inside Nora, shining out of the darkness she carried. The dream that had been shattered was being replaced by the possibility of a new life. Elias watched from a distance. He knew that when women stood together, they could become the strongest wall in the world. He'd seen it not for the first time, but again and again. But the peace of that moment didn't last long. A familiar face appeared at the corner of the market. Daniel. His hair was still neatly combed, his shirt still pressed, but the ease on his face had been replaced by tension. His eyes locked on Nora. He quickened his pace, pushing through the crowd. Nora, he called out. I need to talk to you. Nora thanked Helena and turned back to Elias. Let me go, she said. I need to end this with my own voice. Elias nodded. But I'll be watching. As Daniel approached, the crowd stepped back a little. Everyone could feel it. This was a confrontation. But it was no longer just between a man and a woman. It was between a life and a decision. Why did you come? Nora asked. Daniel was out of breath. I made a mistake. I see that now. The media attention, the town's gossip. It scared me. But I still love you. There was a soft murmur in the crowd. Nora didn't know what she would have done if she'd heard these words just a few days earlier. But she was not the same Nora anymore. No, she said. You didn't love me, you loved how I looked. Quiet, impressive, obedient Nora. I'm not her anymore. I speak for myself now. And I don't forgive you. Daniel's face turned bright red, then pale. He was clearly uncomfortable under all those eyes. You're going to do this to me in front of everyone. You didn't mind leaving me in front of everyone, Nora said, her voice steady. I'm not shaming you, I am just telling the truth. You'll carry your own shame. Then she turned back to Elias. Daniel's desperate words were just background noise now, drifting away like the wind. Nora had chosen to be respected, not just talked about. That day, in the middle of the market crowd, a woman stood tall. A man stood beside her, and the town would not forget that scene for a long time. But the real storm hadn't come yet. Because that night, Elias would decide to open the letter. And the words inside would change not just the past, but the future, too. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sky had darkened, a heavy gray pressing down on everything. As echoes of the marketplace still rang in his ears, Elias stared at the letter on the table. It had been sitting there for days, edges yellowed, curling slightly from the damp. He recognized Lisa's handwriting instantly. He'd seen it years ago on kitchen notes, on shopping lists taped to the window, even in that last short message she'd left before vanishing without goodbye. Don't be late. I'll burn dinner. But now, he was late. Late for dinner, late for life. Nora sat on a stool, watching him. She turned her coffee mug in her hands, saying nothing, just waiting. Her patience was more powerful than any words Elias had heard in years. Sometimes silence was an invitation. Elias opened the letter. The first words caught in his throat. If you're reading this, I'm no longer there. But my words will walk beside you. The letter wasn't long, but every line was a sharp knife. Even on her deathbed, Lisa hadn't blamed Elias. On the contrary, she had forgiven him. I shared you not with another woman, but with your loneliness, she wrote. But maybe I was the reason you ended up alone. I can't ask anything of you now, but I hope that, one day, someone will be patient enough to understand your silence. Elias folded the letter slowly. There wasn't sadness on his face, or maybe there was, but it was the familiar kind. It's like a burden that no longer sits inside me, he murmured. Then he looked at Nora. I just said goodbye to someone who's been silent in me for years, he said. But now there's you. And this house doesn't have to be a graveyard for the past anymore. It can be something living, if you want it to be. Nora stood up and came over. We don't have to bury what's past, she said. Sometimes it's enough just to put things in their place. Just then, the sound of horse hooves came from outside. Elias moved immediately, heading for the door. Nora followed. Glancing out the window, Elias's face went dark. Cal, he said quietly. The man was back. This time he wasn't alone. 2 other men were with him, rifles in their hands, cold, threatening expressions on their faces. Elias opened the door a crack and slipped his gun into his belt. What do you want? He asked. Cal dismounted. I heard your old sweetheart died, and that the cabin's got a runaway bride inside. This place is starting to look interesting, like a treasure chest. Thought I'd stop by and see for myself. You've seen, Elias said. Now move along. But Cal grinned and looked at the men beside him. This place is ours now, Elias. When you were alone, it belonged to you. But now there's a crowd. We come, you go. Everything froze in that moment. Elias lifted his rifle slowly. The tension in the air was as thick as fog, but it wasn't Elias who spoke. Nora stepped forward, holding the envelope from Lisa's letter in her hand. The deed is still in Elias's name, and inside this envelope is Lisa's will. It's witnessed. From this moment, both the ownership and responsibility are his. Kel narrowed his eyes at her. And who are you supposed to be? Nora stepped forward. I'm the woman of this house, the voice of this family. I don't hear you because there's no place in this house for men like you anymore. Cal's face darkened, but before he could reach for his gun, Elias moved ahead. You're leaving, either on your own, or with a bullet in your back? You choose." The men exchanged glances. Cal's mouth twisted. Then they turned and backed away, mounting their horses and kicking up dust as they rode off. But it wasn't a victory, it was the warning of another storm. Elias shut the door. He put the gun aside and touched Nora's hand. "You protected me." Nora nodded. "You protected me, too. So what now?" Elias looked at the dirt road outside the door. "Now, it's time for a real life. But first we have a home to defend. Because the past comes back not only in letters, but in men as well." And so, like the old stove in the cabin, what burned wasn't just wood but the sparks of a bond, resistance, and the first glow of a new life. That morning, Elias was outside the cabin, working with an old stick and a few planks. Inside, Nora was straightening the tablecloth and jotting down a shopping list in a little notebook. Both of them wanted this morning to feel ordinary. But in some places, ordinariness itself is a privilege. Because Elias was sure Cal would come back. Outside, it was silent. No birdsong. Even the wind seemed to be quietly watching the trees. When Nora came to the window, she saw Elias gazing up at the sky. "I can feel it," he said. "They'll come today." Nora didn't answer. She went inside, pulled out a box from under the bed, took the revolver from inside, put it in her pocket. Then she turned quietly to Elias. "Then we're ready too." By noon, clouds of dust appeared on the horizon. Cal and his 3 men approached with purpose this time, guns in hand, faces twisted with anger and the bitter taste of wounded pride. Elias stepped out onto the porch, leaned his rifle against the door. Nora joined him. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was no longer a runaway bride. She was someone who stood her ground, defended, and was ready to fight if she had to. Cal dismounted. "No more talk this time. The land by the lake is ours," he said. "We've got the papers to prove it." Elias laughed. "Those papers, they're not as strong as a woman's last wish. Lisa wrote this house belongs to me. It's notarized. There's a copy with the sheriff. You came to scare us, but you're too late." There was tension among the men. Guns were drawn. Just as fingers hovered over triggers, Elias took a step forward without blinking. "If you're going to shoot, do it. But one bullet won't be enough. This house isn't just a couple, it's a resistance." Nora quietly put her hand in her pocket, drew the gun, and held it steady at her waist. "And me," she said, her voice unwavering. "I was abandoned once, but I'll never back down again." Cal's hand was going for his gun when a sound broke out. Hoofbeats from behind. It was the townsfolk. Helena led the way, a rifle in her hands. Behind her were other women, farmers, the old blacksmith, and a young teacher. They lined up quietly. The only thing they held was their faith in Nora and Elias. "That's enough," Helena shouted. "This town isn't like it used to be. Women aren't alone anymore, and men can't stay silent like the women they once left behind." Cal turned, looked at his men. They didn't resist. One by one, they backed away. Cal stood there for a moment longer. But now, he was more defeated than angry. He locked eyes with Nora. She said nothing, her eyes said it all. Cal mounted his horse and rode away. This time, for good. Elias dropped his rifle to the ground. Nora took a deep breath. Helena came up and squeezed her hand. "You don't need a wedding dress. You need armor," she said. Then added, "But you still look wonderful when you dance. Tonight, there'll be music in the square. Come, both of you." That evening, under candlelight, with mandolin music and laughter all around, Nora and Elias danced together for the first time. Their steps weren't perfect. The rhythm wasn't flawless. But who cared? Everyone knew. For a moment, life had paused in the center of that floor. Everyone was watching. But this time, Nora didn't hide from the glances. She stood tall, chin up. Elias's hands were at her waist. Strong, steady, honest. At the end of the dance, Nora leaned in and whispered to Elias, "What kind of ending fits this story, do you think?" Elias smiled. "I don't think this is an ending. It's just a beginning." And that night, the sky scattered its stars not just over them, but in memory of everyone who had ever been alone. The next morning, when Nora opened the little cabin door, she had a paintbrush in her hand. Over the door, she painted the words beside Elias's name. Some houses are not built of 4 walls, but from 2 hearts. And from then on, this house was not a home for the past, but for the future.